Hey everyone, welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil, and tonight's going to be kind of a rough one. I think it's time for me to talk about a time in my life that fills me with a lot of shame, a lot of regret, a lot of self-loathing. Normally I'm content to just kind of keep quiet about this stuff, but recent events in 2020 make me think that I might have a responsibility to say something about my experiences, to, I don't know, sway public opinion or help stop a brutal machine from ruining more lives. I don't know. I feel powerless. I feel helpless. I feel hopeless. So I guess I'm just trying to do something, anything that feels like it might help. Tonight I want to talk about the fact that I was a police officer for almost 10 years. And specifically, I want to talk about the way that police work taught me to dehumanize people. I could talk for hours about the profession, about how complicated but ultimately toxic it is. But after the BLM protests and the Kenosha militia murders, I think zeroing in on the slow, seductive process of dehumanization is maybe one of the more important things I can talk about tonight. So, no true cop can resist telling war stories, so I'm going to start with one. So there I was, fresh off of training. I had just gotten hired. I was on patrol with my FTO in our city. Our city was a dense urban area, predominantly low income. First and second generation Hispanic. And because of that, the city was full of people who were driving without driver's licenses. And they were driving cars that had broken headlights, broken taillights, that kind of thing. So one day we pulled over just such a car, and it happened to be driven by a single mother with 3 children in her car and about 20 bags of groceries. And because she was driving without a license legally, we were allowed to tow her car as punishment. And so when my FTO told me to call for a tow, I felt kind of bad, and I said, "Sir, we're only like 5 blocks from our house, and she's got her kids and she's got all these groceries." And he cut me off and he said, "I don't care. Fuck these people. Call for the tow." And so we watched as her and her 3 kids unloaded the bags of groceries onto the hot sidewalk and started making phone calls trying to figure out what they were going to do to get these groceries back to their house. And I gotta be honest with you, that image of a mom and her 3 kids standing on the sidewalk surrounded by groceries, it's burned into my brain as deeply as any murder scene that I was ever on. I just felt like such a tool doing that to her. And my TO saw that I was perturbed, and he pulled me aside and he said, "These people think that they can just break the law and nothing bad will ever happen to them." He said that unlicensed drivers, crash into people, kill people, and that if we were to let this woman go and she crashed into someone later, we'd be blamed for it. And so he said, "I've got no sympathy for her." And I would hear versions of that a lot. We were out on a call once where a young teen gangster was shot at a family party, and he was bleeding to death in front of his family. And I turned to the officer next to me and I said, "Man, that's really messed up, bleeding to death in front of your family." And the other cop turned to me and he said, "It's just a gangster, fuck him." It happened when a homeless person would overdose in an alley. They'd be like, "It's just a transient, fuck 'em. It's just an addict, fuck 'em." Just to really skeeve you out. One time one of my FTOs put it this way. He said, "These people come up here from Mexico and they think they can just live like they did in their little villages with no rules. Well, I'm not going to let them turn our city into Juarez." So do you see the subtle or not so subtle ideology at play here? People who break the law don't deserve sympathy. We should make law breaking as painful as possible, to teach them a lesson, to dissuade them from committing more crimes, or to prevent them from turning the city into, you know. I want you to put a pin in this concept that breaking the law should be as painful as possible. I'm going to come back to it. Because next we need to talk about using force. When I was in the police academy, I would say about 40% of it was learning legal codes and procedural stuff, and about 60% was physical toughness, use of force, and officer safety. You know, early in the academy, they would sit you down to watch lots of dash cam footage of police officers being murdered, police officers being ambushed, police officers being shot to death on routine traffic stops, and it would be drilled into you. There's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. At any moment, somebody might run up on you with a gun, and you've got to be ready. And once your head is full of cop death, that's when they start teaching you the boxing and the wrestling and the judo and the aikido and the firearms training. That's when you start learning the laws about when you get to use force and how much force you get to use. And I'm being precise on that last part. I would say most of the use of force instruction that I received was on knowing what was the maximum amount of force you could get away with. You know, the court case, Graham versus Connor, that was like our mantra that we learned. What would a reasonable officer do in this situation? You could also learn a court case like Tennessee versus Garner, which says that you get to shoot a fleeing suspect if you have probable cause to believe that they will present a deadly threat to other officers or the public. So, without getting too deep into the weeds about reasonable officer standards versus probable cause, I want you to imagine this for a second. You've got a bunch of fresh-faced rookies who've just spent hours watching cops murdered by members of the public, and then they get told that justifiable use of force revolves around the officer's perception of how dangerous members of the public are. You know, and this indoctrination continued onto the streets when I finally got hired. FTOs were relentless about officer safety. Every traffic stop, every ped check, every call for service, they were constantly pointing out what could have happened. You know, somebody could have popped out of the trunk with an AK-47. You know, he could have had a gun in the glove box. She could have stabbed you in the back when you turned around. You could have been ambushed when you went around that blind corner. And it may sound silly or dramatic to you, but to be fair, police officers do get shot. They do get stabbed. They do get ambushed sometimes. And so the training teaches you to be ready to kill. It teaches you to want to kill so that you don't become a victim. And so again, if the legal standard for use of force relies on what a reasonable officer would do in that situation, what is a reasonable response to years of training that says that everyone might try to kill you? Let's put a pin in that idea. And now let's sprinkle in a landmark essay from Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, a law enforcement trainer and combat researcher who is a hero to cops everywhere. I've seen him speak live. He's like a rock star to cops. Grossman divides the world into sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. The sheep are members of the public. The wolves are the bad guys, and the sheepdogs are the cops. The sheepdogs protect the sheep from wolves, but the sheepdogs are not sheep themselves. And, according to Dave Grossman, the sheep distrust the sheepdogs because they kind of resemble wolves, and the sheep don't like being told what to do. And I know it's supposed to be a cute metaphor or whatever, but think of the messaging at play here. Cops are not members of their community. They are above and in charge of that community. And the community rarely appreciates it. All the sheepdogs have is each other. Pin it. Alright, so let's review what we have pinned in the brains of cops. Cops are fundamentally separate from members of the public. Members of the public might try to kill a cop at any time, and breaking the law should be as painful as possible to deter crime. If you're a regular, nice person who, let's say, is getting into law enforcement for all the right reasons, mentally, what must you do to hold these 3 lessons in your head and still feel like a nice person at the same time? You pretty much have to begin dehumanizing the community in your mind to be able to do what's necessary to be safe, to prevent crime, and to protect your fellow officers from being murdered. You know, and to be clear, this dehumanization didn't make me like snarl at children or be awful to members of the public all the time. I was a nice cop most of the time. I was the funny cop. I like to make people laugh. I like to make them smile. And I worked with a lot of guys that were very funny. They were charming, you know, and they were helpful a lot of the time. However, when someone disrespected us, when someone refused to comply or did not sufficiently honor their friendly neighborhood sheepdog, it was very easy for me to slip into a mode where I made life very difficult for people. The rule in training for dealing with people was you ask, you tell, you make. We had a lot of ways to make you do stuff. Sometimes we could make you do stuff by beating you up. Sometimes we could make you do stuff by towing the family car. Sometimes we could make you do stuff by arresting you and your friends on flimsy charges. Because we knew that even if they didn't stick, you were the one stuck in jail all weekend. To be clear, many times I personally shoved someone into a cycle of debt and incarceration that they might still be dealing with to this day. I firmly believe deep in my heart that I have personally ruined people's lives, maybe permanently, because of my choices, and choices that were legal for me to make. And yeah, visiting all manner of hardships on a community of low-income immigrants feels pretty bad at first. So you have to harden yourself. They're just illegals, fuck them. They're just addicts, fuck them. They're just gangsters, fuck them. So when you see Officer Tim Lohman shoot 12-year-old Tamir Rice after 1 second on the scene, when you see Officer Derek Chauvin grinding George Floyd's neck into the pavement, when you see Louisville Metro Police Department botch a raid and gun down Breonna Taylor in her own bed, when you see Officer Rustin Shesky shoot Jacob Blake in the back 7 times in front of his kids, and when you see Kyle Rittenhouse take a rifle across state lines to gun down BLM protesters 20 miles away from his community, I want you to understand what's happening in their heads. They have ceased to see some people, mainly black people, as humans worthy of dignity and respect. They see themselves as separate and above the public, and they believe that the only way to keep order and to prevent the city from turning into, you know, is to violently punish people to convince the rest of us that deviation from social control will be painful and maybe deadly. I mean, you see it in the way that police across the country are torturing protesters and shooting chemical weapons at members of the press indiscriminately. Remember, the protests are about police brutality, and the only response from law enforcement is to up the brutality. Why would they do this unless they have completely dehumanized the public and that they believe that only fear and pain will dissipate civil unrest? Now look, am I saying that all cops are bastards? Let me start over. Am I saying that every individual cop is privately waging a racist crusade against black people and that they harbor a deep festering hatred in their heart of hearts? No, I'm not saying that. But if you've watched any of my recent videos, you know that I'm not interested in individual actions. I'm interested in the ways that structures and systems and unjust hierarchies harm people. So it's irrelevant to me what's in this or that cop's heart, because the system encourages cops to dehumanize people. The system protects cops who do it, and polite white society applauds them for keeping a boot on the neck of, you know. So why am I telling you this? Because I think you need to know this when you read stories of police violence and watch footage of the protests. I think you need to know this so that you don't dehumanize your fellow human. I don't want you to say, they're just thugs, fuck them, and avert your gaze when your fellow human is tortured by the state. Many of the people murdered by police are in some kind of crisis. Maybe it's addiction, maybe it's desperation born from poverty, maybe it's a mental health episode. You know, many of the people murdered by police are disabled. Many are poor. Many have been traumatized by past experiences with authority. As someone who did the job for many years, I'm telling you that the majority of people killed by police deserve help, not death. And if you believe me when I say that, I want you to ask yourself this. Are you sure you'll never need help one day? The people who are killed by police are people like you. Sometimes they're people who made bad choices. In the case of Tamir Rice or Breonna Taylor, some of them are people who've done nothing wrong. Is that the kind of world that you want to live in? One where you could be killed for one bad decision or simply because a bunch of cops got the wrong address? When you watch the protests, when you see them get rowdy, when you see it get heated, I want you to remember something. The protesters aren't just protesting for George Floyd or Jacob Blake. They're protesting for you. For your right to be alive, for your right to need help sometimes, for your right to be human in the eyes of the state. If we can make police stop murdering black people, it makes all of us safer from unaccountable state terror. You know, and do I have some ideas about what should happen to the police as a state function? Sure, but I don't want to get into that right now. We have lots of options, and besides, you should be listening to Black, Indigenous, and people of color about what they need for their community, not me. All I want you to do is to think a different way about the images that you see on social media, and I want you to soften your heart. I promise you, I know this from experience. If you dehumanize people long enough, you won't like who you become. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for hearing me out. Please share this video with people that you think need to hear it. Appreciate you joining me, and maybe I'll catch you next time. Have a good night and be safe out there.